Well, good morning, church. You know, in 1865, there was a manager at a British insurance company, and he became very ill. And it just kind of came out of nowhere and just hit him really hard. He was bedridden, and he got depressed, and then he was sick, almost to the point of death. And then things kind of turned around for him. And as things started to turn around, he was recovering, and he found hope by spending a lot of time reading his Bible. Now, the hope that he found in the Bible drove him to write some famous hymns like Alleluia, Sing to Jesus, and As with Gladness, Men of Old. But those are not the hymns that he's probably most famous for. His most famous hymn is probably one that started out as a poem. He wrote a poem about Christmas time that likely served as the encouragement to him to write a hymn, and it was in a very similar vein. And when he wrote this hymn, he meant it to be sung to the melody of another song that was very popular at the time. The popular song was A New Northern Ditty of Ye Lady Greensleeves. Or we actually might know that better today as simply Greensleeves. Now, there's evidence that this was actually a bold decision for him to make, because Greensleeves was written around 1580 and seems to be sort of a raunchy song for its time, because a woman in a green gown back then was actually a term that you would use for sexually promiscuous women. You can imagine how a woman engaged in inappropriate behavior outdoors may end up with grass stains on her dress, or as the song puts it, green sleeves. And so the song actually seems to be about a sexually promiscuous woman or even a prostitute, although there is some debate about that. Some people think that the song is about a woman who's being accused of being promiscuous, but actually was just being treated unfairly. But if this was kind of an edgy song like that, it would be an interesting tune to choose to write a Christmas song to, right? It might not seem like a big deal to you, but what would happen today if a modern worship leader said, you know what, I think it'd be really nice to write a deeply profound worship song to the tune of Baby Got Back? Might not go over very well, right? I mean, maybe if it's a parody or something, it might go over okay. But a lot of people would take issue, like, no, that song already means something that we don't really want to be singing about in church, right? But what's interesting is that Greensleeves had actually been rewritten as Christmas and New Year's tunes many times before this guy actually did it. And this is because the church has a long history of redemption, of taking something that is broken and offering it a chance at restoration, which is very much like what Christ has done for us. And so that's likely why he might have chosen a melody like this. And because of this, William Chatterton Dix sat down and wrote the famous Christmas carol that we just sang together. And so if you're following along with your sermon notes this morning, today's message is called, What Child Is This? We're going to be in Isaiah 53, verses 4 through 10. Luke 2, verses 4 through 11, and Matthew 2, verses 9 through 12. And so to begin, we start looking at this song, and the song asks a very profound question. What child is this? It's kind of a rhetorical question, but I think it's one that we should actually take seriously. What child is this? And so here's your first fill in the blank if you're filling in your blanks this morning. Each person must answer the question, what child is this? No one gets to escape this question. The child that we're singing about, who is he? And the song kind of implies that there are two different answers for people to choose from. You can have the basic observation on the surface that the song starts with, or you can have a more profound answer to the question, which the song also talks about. And so the basic observation is what's described at the very beginning of the song. What child is this who, laid to rest on Mary's lap, is sleeping? There's nothing special to that, right? If we turn to Luke 2, we see that this also goes along with the Christmas story, and it's pretty mundane. In Luke 2, verse 4, it says, And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. So a regular old guy takes a regular old trip to a regular old town with a regular old wife and has a regular old baby. At least that's what it kind of seems like here, right? In this portion of the text, nothing incredible happens. This is very normal, nothing to write home about. definitely nothing to write a song about, and really nothing to write in the Bible about. A kid was born. Very usual. Sleeps in his mom's lap, big whoop, right? But it's everything else about this passage that is very unusual, very not normal, and that's why there is a question. What child is this? And it goes on and gives more detail. The next part of the song we sing is, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch or keeping. It's like, okay, so the shepherds aren't a big deal, but angels? The angels are singing songs about this birth? Well, let's see what Luke chapter 2 tells us about this section. In verse 8, it says, in the same region, there were shepherds out in the field keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with great fear. And the angel said to them, fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. Okay, so now this is a little bit different. These incredible angels appear to make a very powerful statement, right? Now, the imagery here is one of the inspirations for the stage design that you see behind you, right? Which took a very long time to put up, by the way. Between Tasha's inspiration and then what I had to do and my kids and my parents and the rooters and Gracie's friends, it took hundreds of man-hours, more than 100 pounds of pillow stuffing, and enough hot glue to have saved the Titanic to make the stage, all right? And I want to make sure that everybody who helped out gets credit here, because people might think I did a lot, but I mostly ate fried chicken in the basement. So I want to make sure everybody else gets all the credit that they deserve. So thank you to everybody who's in here that helped out on the stage. But the main idea of the stage here goes beyond just angels making a declaration. It's this idea of heaven meeting the earth. Right? That there's something small and insignificant happening on this small planet out in the middle of the universe. Right? Which is why we have this light shining. If you're very geographically astute, you might realize that that light is shining on an area that we might call Israel today, or back then. Right? That of all the things going on in the universe, in heaven, where God is being praised, and there's these angels declaring things, and you can see these pillars with incense that are smoking in the worship of God, that in the midst of all of this heavenly excitement and joy, it all comes down to this tiny little speck of a person in the middle of a place, in the middle of earth, in the middle of the universe, under heaven. And it's insane to think about that. Why would there be something so tiny as a baby being born on earth that would cause an explosion of joy and worship in heaven? There's a connection there. And there's a lot of things that don't really make sense. And as limited as our human efforts are to build a stage like this, the shepherds got to see the real thing. The real thing. And so as they appear, so does the glory of the Lord that shines around them. And this is known as the Shekinah glory in the Hebrew, the physical presence of God on earth. The glory that shone as a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire for the Israelites. The presence of God that indwelt the Ark of the Covenant. And this is a very important idea. The glory of the Lord as in God's presence on earth. God's presence on earth. In other words, you might say, Emmanuel, God with us, as Jacob talked about last week in his message. And when these angels show up to these shepherds, they come to bring good news. And their good news is this in verse 11. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior who is Christ the Lord. That's why. And so this passage answers the question, what child is this? And then the answer comes in the next line of the song. This is Christ the King. That's what child this is. Whom shepherds guard and angels sing, haste, haste to bring him laud, the babe, the son of Mary. And so we're exposed to this tension that exists between creation that is fallen and Christ in his kingdom of heaven. On one hand, there are these simple, dirty, lowly shepherds that are chosen to witness the coming Messiah. On the other hand, you have these angels of God who are delivering the message to shepherds about a baby who is sleeping in a feeding trough. There's a crazy amount of tension there that doesn't make sense. And in this tension, we are called to bring him laud. Laud means to praise highly a person or their achievements. This doesn't make sense to us, church. But this is exactly what God does. If you turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 1 real quick, you'll see that in this passage here that Paul talks about the way God works. And it fits exactly the scenario we're talking about. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 27 through 29. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. God makes things not make sense on purpose. The things we wouldn't expect, the things we wouldn't plan for, the things that we see, and it's like, yeah, but this is how it is, and this is what you say, and I don't get it. There's power in that, church. Just when you think you got it all figured out, God flips everything on its head. The very thing that makes no sense is the one thing that actually does. The things that we find to be weak are the things that defeat the strong. Here, God in the flesh comes as a baby. That's pretty weak. Later on, Jesus chooses a ragtag group of men to build up what would become the largest faith in the world. The holiest man to ever walk the earth hung out with tax collectors and prostitutes. When Israel thought that Jesus came to overthrow the government with military strength, he instead taught them to love their enemies and love the least of these. Church, here's your next fill in the blank this morning. God's story is rarely what is expected. The story of Jesus makes no sense, and thank God for that. Because if it did, if everything made sense the way we would think it would make sense, all of us sinners would just burn in hell the way we deserve. But shockingly, that's not what the creator of the universe chose. And so the song continues by describing this reality by asking more questions. The next question is, why lies he in such mean a state? Where ox and ass are feeding, good Christian fear for sinners here, the silent word is pleading. He asks, why is the King of Kings lying in this terrible, awful, dirty position? He says mean estate, mean as in unkind or unfair. You know, like you're a big meanie head, mean. And estate as in a location or possessions. Why does the Messiah get dealt the bad hand? It doesn't make sense. And then he points out that this is where ox and ass, or sometimes we sing fowl or lamb, because we try not to say ass, which means donkey, because we don't have enough grown-ups in the church to sing that without giggling or being offended. So we switch the words, right? But the point of the line here is that Christ is sleeping where the animals are eating. In a barn, or more likely in a cave where the animals were stored. And he's in their food dish. Is this how you treat a king? No, we would never treat an earthly king that way unless we really didn't like him. Maybe in France or something they would have done that, but like not here, not with any king that we think of, not a king you want to honor. But here's the thing. In our scenario, our king is working. Jesus came with work to do. If we flip over to Matthew 1, verse 21, we see Jesus' purpose was actually given to Joseph when he was waiting on Mary. In chapter 1, verse 21, it says, she will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. That was his purpose. And that's why Jesus' birth is good news for us, church. Here's your next fill in the blank. Jesus is a king with a mission. Jesus is a king with a mission. See, in the song, he's called the silent word. Humble, right? Silence because Jesus is very much a human infant. Sometimes we forget that Jesus was 100% God and 100% human. We forget that. We look at him and we think he's 50-50. But Jesus wasn't half God, half human. He was all God, all human. He was 200%, a concept that we can't really fathom, okay? And so as a real human baby, he could not speak, he could not write, he could not walk, because he was a human baby, limited. His very silent presence begins the process of God reaching out to us. Jesus came to plead with us, to come to him, to come to salvation, to be a part of his kingdom. And he came silently, humbly as a human being, as one who even sleeps among the animals. And later on, we'll see that his silence goes to even more than that. You see, Jesus didn't just show up like some president flying an Air Force One over a natural disaster going, yeah, that looks pretty rough down there. I hope they get that figured out. No, Jesus came boots on the ground to address the problem of our sin once and for all. Our separation from God. He's like, I'm going to be here in the flesh and I'm going to do something about it. And he did it because he was with us and he was one of us. And so he literally got down and dirty. But when you think about this idea of Jesus coming and sleeping in a manger, this is far from the worst treatment that our King would receive from us. You think sleeping with animals is bad? Look at the next line of the song. Nails, spear shall pierce him through. The cross he borne for me, for you. Hail, hail, the Word made flesh, the babe, the Son of Mary. Church, this is how God's mission was accomplished. The very Word of God, which is Jesus, had to become a physical human. He had to become flesh. In John 1:14, we've all probably read this verse before, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So Shekinah, God's glory, his physical presence here on earth, shows up, and so he is the Son of God. He is the Word of God, who also became flesh through the act of being born as a literal human being with flesh. And there's this thing about human flesh. It carries with it the possibility of being pierced and being killed. That's what happens when you're flesh. You cannot kill God, but you can kill men who have flesh, which is why Jesus had to take it. And so the Word becomes flesh that he may die our death. Church, here's your next fill in the blank. Jesus came to be our hope. This is a vital piece of the puzzle as we try to answer the question that the song is asking, what child is this? He's not just a dirty old baby from the first century. He's our hope. And this hope comes because he removes the reality of what it is that we've done ourselves, to remove the separation that sin has caused us between us and God. And this has always been God's plan. Look at what Isaiah wrote some 800 years before Jesus in Isaiah 53, verses 4 through 10. And bear with me, it's a little bit long, but this is really important. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet opened not his mouth. The silent word is pleading. He opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is being led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people? And they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich a man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth, yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He had put him to grief when his soul makes an offering for guilt. He shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. So what is that saying, church? Jesus was treated horribly. It was wildly unjust. He was there pleading from the cross, although he didn't open his mouth as they killed him. Right? He took the punishment, but the act of his crucifixion is supposed to draw us to him to plead, please take my sacrifice for yourself. And he was pleading and mistreated and killed. He suffered. And yet, even with how horribly Christ was treated, this was the will of God. Honestly, given the choice between a manger and a cross, I'd take the manger any day. But our King, who again makes no sense, chose the cross for our sake, even the ones that put him on the cross. For me, for you, as the song says. And so because of that, we say, hail the Word made flesh, the babe, the Son of Mary. There's a response, right? Here's what he did, and so here's what we will do, right? He died, and so we will hail him. And to back that up, the song flips over to a story that likely took place a lot later, right? The words of the song are, so bring him incense, gold, and myrrh. Come peasant, king, to own him. The King of kings salvation brings, let loving hearts enthrone him. And so Matthew chapter 2 tells the story about three wise men. We've probably, anybody in here not heard of the wise men? Pretty sure all you guys have heard of the wise men, right? But you might be thinking of them as, oh, we three kings of Orient are. But actually, these three men were actually probably not kings at all. They were most likely the Magi, who were a remnant of Babylon's living library that Nebuchadnezzar had put together during the exile. See, last week, Jacob mentioned one of the exiles and how when nations were invaded by Babylon, they would take the best and the brightest and put them into their own captivity, and many of them became wise men or magi, where we get the word magician from. The king would then go to these men that he has collected from other countries and go, hey, do you guys know anything about this? Do you know how to work with these trees? Do you know anything about this disease? And he would ask them for help to see if they knew anything, because these were all the smart guys from the countries he had taken over. They were sort of the Babylonian Google or Boogle or Majugal or whatever, I don't know. But anyway, during the exile that Jacob mentioned, Daniel, who was hanging out with the Magi back then, likely shared with them the Jewish prophecy that a king would be born in Bethlehem, probably the one from Micah. And so these guys, these Magi, remembered what Daniel had said for generations and generations and generations of these Magi that kept passing down knowledge. And so when they see the star, they know that a king is being born. And so they come into town and they find King Herod, which makes a lot of sense, because if you hear that a king is being born, you're going to go where the king lives, right? Be like, hey, where's this king that we've been waiting for? But it turns out the king they've been waiting for is a different kind of king. And so when Herod hears that there's this new king coming, he flips out. He kills every boy under the age of 2 in the area to make sure none of them survive long enough to take his job. And so the Magi end up keeping Jesus a secret, and his parents hide him in Egypt for a while. Now, we don't know how old Jesus was when the wise men showed up. A lot of us think it's like, boom, baby comes out and the wise men are like, hey, we're here. It probably wasn't like that. Some think it was as much as 2 years later, which is why Herod would kill all the baby boys under 2, because he knew that over a 2-year period, this kid would be growing. He certainly wouldn't have been older than 2 if that's the case. Plus, we also know as we read forward, we're going to see that Jesus was in a house at this time and no longer in a cave or in a barn in a manger, right? So something had changed. So maybe Joseph did the census for Rome and stuck around to stay with his extended family for a couple of years. Or maybe church tradition is right and they came on January 6th, which is 12 days after Christmas on Epiphany. But then that would mean that Jesus was actually born on December 25th, which is a date that would be unlikely to hold a census, where you wouldn't expect people to travel in bad weather. But then again, the climate in Israel is a lot like Southern California. So maybe no one cared about traveling in the winter once the harvest was over. So you know what? I don't know. Somewhere between day 1 and 2 years, the Magi show up, okay? But this isn't the point that I actually want to make with the Magi. If we look to Matthew chapter 2, verse 9, we'll actually see what I do want to focus here. Matthew 2, verse 9, it says, after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, and going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. So the important part here is the third verse of this song, and that carries the response that we have for Jesus. And the Magi do a really good job of showing us what that looks like. Here's your next fill in the blank, church. Our proper response to Christ is to worship him. When these guys, the Magi, when they show up and see their king, they worship him and they give him gifts. They give him gold to represent the riches of a king. They give him frankincense to represent the temple incense used by the priest. And they give him myrrh to represent the burial spices that would be used when someone died. So the wise men are very wise. Not just because they know a bunch of stuff, but because they acknowledge Jesus as their king, their high priest, and the one who would die as a sacrifice for their sins. Church, Jesus is the King of Kings and the author of our salvation, and so, in his own divinity, he is worthy of our worship. And so the song implores us to come to Jesus, and it says, come peasant, comma, king to own him. It's not come peasant king, like the peasant kings are going to come. No, come peasant or come king. It doesn't matter what your status is. You can be the bottom of the bottom or the top of the top. No matter who you are in the social construct, you need to go to Jesus. Because however high you are in this world, it's not high enough. Because even if you're a king, Jesus is the King of Kings. And he's the one who brings us salvation in a way that only he can. And so the song rounds out then to a close in this way. Raise, raise a song on high, the virgin sings her lullaby. Joy, joy, for Christ is born, the babe, the son of Mary. And so at this point, we come back to the simplicity of the manger. There's a baby who is hearing a song being sung by his mother. And we also sing to Christ, even a song like this one as an act of worship, a song of joy because Christ has been born in the midst of a dark world. And so that returns us also then to the beginning of the message, back to the top where we have a question to answer. What child is this? And each of us must answer this for ourselves. For some people, they believe Jesus was just the small baby part. A simple, usual, everyday human child born in an insignificant place to an insignificant person on an insignificant day. That is, if he was even born at all, because many people don't even think that that part's even true. Or you could choose the other answer, which I personally like to call the truth. And so as we sing this song again, I think we should reflect on the question. What child is this? But don't just ask the question. I think we should also agree to answer the question with the truth that is in the song, that comes right out of the Word of God. That unto us all a child was born in Bethlehem, and he is our Savior, he is Christ, and he is Lord of all creation, and for this reason we will choose to stand and sing and worship him together.